Making up the Raglan sleeve shirt dress. This is part 1. Download the pattern and instructions from AngelaKane.com. It's easy. I'm making it up in fine grey chambray. See AngelaKane.com for fabric supplies. All I need is thread, iron-on interfacing, and I'll raid my button box again. My patterns really are the easiest to assemble. Check them out. I have pre-washed to allow shrinkage before cutting out. Snip all notches. Tailor tack all dots. I keep a bag of lining bits and also one for interfacing. They will always come in handy if you just need a small piece. Mark the notches and dots as before. For the interfacing, trim off the seam allowance. For the front band, just measure a strip, it's quicker. If you are using up interfacing, you can always piece the front band if it won't fit. These pieces will fit on my offcuts. I'm using non-woven so I can ignore the straight grain. Follow the manufacturer's instructions for iron-on interfacing. I have interfaced one pair of yokes, the pockets below the fold line, the button bands, and the lower edges of the sleeves. Try to keep tailor tacks out of the way. Reinforce pocket position on the fronts to reduce the risk of tearing. Transfer the construction marking to the interfacing. Pencil works quite well on interfacing. Stay stitch all curved seams to prevent stretching. Stitch just within the seam allowance. I strongly recommend using a stitching guide if you have one. It keeps your stitching line constant. Now for the sewing. Pin, baste and stitch the shoulder darts. The shoulder darts are stitched. Press towards the back, that is, towards the double notched edge. Next we will prepare the pockets. So, right side facing up. Match the lining to the pocket facing edge. As always, make sure you are matching the notches. Don't make the mistake of matching the ends of the raw edges. Hand baste along these edges. Baste along the stitching line. Fold down and match the notches along the outer edge. So we have folded down the pocket facing. Machining all the way around the pocket from fold to fold. Pin, baste and stitch. Whether you are sewing over pins, which is to be discouraged or not, always wear eye protection at the sewing machine. Trim the seam allowance and snip the curve. Remove the basting. Turn through. The lining is slip stitched in place along here. Press the curve, encouraging the lining to the inside. Slip stitch the lining back in place. Top stitch with one row along here and a double row along here. Pin and baste the pockets in position, then top stitch around the edge. Make a double row at the corners. The pockets are attached. Next we attach the front button band. So it's right side of the band to wrong side of the front. I'll roughly pin to show how this works. Turn the band to the right side and press. The seam allowance is turned in. Pin and baste in place. And then both edges are top stitched. Leave the band unattached for at least 4 inches or 10 centimeters from the hem to finish later. The band is pressed to the front. There is no need to trim these seam allowances. Top stitch just in from the edge. This time stop about 20 centimeters or 8 inches from the hem to finish later. If you do opt for sewing over pins rather than basting first, always wear eye protection. Goggles or glasses. I never sit at my sewing machine without them. Button bands are top stitched. We move on to the back and the back pleat. The pleat can be on the outside or the inside, or just pressed to one side. This time I'm having the pleats centrally on the inside. Measure and baste the pleat. Press in the pleat. Next we join the raglan sleeves to the front. Front raglan seams have single notches. Match and pin notches and seam ends first, before you start snipping into seam allowances. Wherever there is tightness, snip. Here the front needs snipping. And at the underarm. Baste and machine. If there is excess fullness, just ease it in. Now to join on the back piece. As before, match the notches and snip the curves. Double notches this time. This is the right front. Complete the left front raglan sleeve in the same way. So from the right side, I have top stitched the raglan seams, having overlocked the seam allowance and pressed it downwards. A zigzag stitch will do just as well. A tailor's ham is useful for pressing these curved seams. Now for the yoke. With right sides together, join centre backs and press open. The dot marks the centre front. This is the interfaced yoke. We will match the centre backs. The dots correspond to the back raglan seam, the dart, and the front raglan seam. This section between the notches will be eased or slightly gathered. So pinned ready for basting. You will need to snip here and also across the shoulder. Here is the easing. The yoke seam allowance extends for finishing later. I'll pin the other side, baste and get this machined. If you are experienced enough to do this without pinning and basting, go ahead. The yoke is now joined on. Trim the seam to reduce bulk. Again, you will find a tailor's ham useful for pressing this curved seam. When pressing this with steam, hold a pad in place after lifting the iron. This holds in the steam and gives you a much better result with less heat. Tailors use a wooden block for the same reason. We will now attach the under yoke. Pin and baste in place. Machine along the front edge, around the neckline and down the edge. Note the seam allowance here remains folded up. After machining, trim and mitre at the corners. Trim surplus seam allowance at back seam. Turn through and press. Ease out the corners. Turn in the ends. Once the neckline edge has been pressed, this seam allowance will be trimmed, turned under and slip stitched. Looking nice from the front. I have pressed the neckline. I have chosen to turn this under and slip stitch. But you could just overlock or zigzag and leave flat. Trim. Turn the end in. Slip stitch. We will be top stitching around all the edges of the yoke. The yoke is attached and the inside is neat. From the outside, top stitch along the edges. stitching makes all the difference to the finish. Now we can join the sleeve and side seams in one go, from cuff to hemline. We will finish this dress in part 2. I hope you enjoy making up this pattern. Easy download and assembly from angelakane.com. Sewing patterns, pattern cutting, and sewing tutorials. Subscribe to my channel to be kept up to date. Thank you very much for watching this video.